Welcome everybody to our talk. Welcome to Cephalocon, but that has been said 1,000 times already, I think. I was very happy to see everybody, or almost everybody, at the boats yesterday. At least that was my perception. But did everybody enjoy the boat yesterday, or nobody? Somebody missed it, I heard. Welcome to my first Cephalocon, because I haven't had a Cephalocon yet. So I'm very happy to see all the faces. For me, a lot of them new. I brought one of the old faces with me to do this talk. So, Wido.
Yeah, good morning, everybody. So, we are going to give a talk on a tech conference about environmental impact and financial stuff. So, don't expect anything technical to hear during this talk, because then, there's the door if you're here for technical things. We're going to talk about environment and finance. And a bit of background on, where we come from, who we are. Wido, born and live in the Netherlands, and married 2 sons. I was a co-founder of a Dutch hosting company, and I also founded 42On, the company which Wout is working at now. I'm no longer active within that company, and in my daily life now, I'm CTO of a group, Your Online. But I am a Ceph enthusiast, IPv6 enthusiast, therefore the question during the opening earlier today. And I think a lot about sustainability, because I think, in general, we have a problem which we need to fix as humanity, and there's many ways we have an impact on the environment, and IT is one of them. But before we continue to that point, what is Your Online? Your Online is a group of hosting companies in Europe, in Spain, France, and the Netherlands. It was actually started in the Netherlands by a family office. A million customers, 600 employees. And my role as CTO is one of the things is ESG, environmental, social, and governance. And I'll get to that later during the presentation. But we have many brands. So Your Online itself, you will not find that as a brand online where you can become a customer. We have all kinds of brands throughout Europe, which we run and which are my responsibility as CTO. But we use Ceph a lot, and then not Your Online, our brands use Ceph a lot. So Axarnet in Spain is running Ceph, Gandhi is running Ceph, and Your Hosting, Versio are running Ceph in the Netherlands. So we have a lot of Ceph deployments, but not under the name Your Online.
So then, who am I? I'm Wout. As Wido said, I took over 42On management from him a couple of years ago now. As Wido, I think a lot about sustainability, about positive impact. So how do you go from sustaining things to having an actual positive impact on things? And it's not an easy thing to do. And it's something that we as a company also think about. And with me as a company, I mean the people of 42On, the people that make up the company, also think about it a lot and have real concern about how we're going to tackle those problems. So when talking about 42On, who are we? I saw a lot of familiar faces when the lights were on. So some of you know us. We at 42On, we are a Ceph consulting company, and we help organizations succeed with Ceph. That's our main goal. We do that. We design and build and manage Ceph environments, and we train and help Ceph teams. So first off, why this talk, or why could you do things differently with Ceph? So I don't want to go into depths of this because, as Wido said, this is not a technical talk. But in general, Ceph is designed to provide its services despite component failure. So it is designed to scale out. It is designed to distribute its load, and not designed to scale up and depend on single components to achieve uptime. So achieving uptime is done despite using components that could fail. So in that sense, if you design a Ceph architecture well, you should be able to lose functionality of some of the parts.
Yeah, and I do recommend for this, if you want to go back to the background of Ceph, read the original papers written by Sage in the 2006, 2008. They are still relevant for many things, how Ceph works. It's the philosophy of where the project came from and how it was designed, and how it actually ties into the design for failure. So when we talk about servers, we usually say, 5 years. Those are old machines, right? Some say we need to replace machines every 3 years. because everybody has been telling us that we need to replace machines every 5 years at least, because they're now outdated, they're old, they're end of life, end of support, no BIOS updates. So we'll throw them away and we'll buy new servers, right? Hands, although it's a bit dark, who replaces the machines every 5 years? See one hand. Okay, less than 5 years. Oh, this audience. Okay, well, maybe already on the good track, but it goes on YouTube as well, so that's good. For later. So, but if you say that you operate a machine for 5 years, you usually actually operate it for about 4 years, because it gets purchased, and then it needs to be delivered. It goes into the data center. It needs to be installed. Production needs to move towards this machine. This process can easily take 6 months. And then 6 months before they actually need to be replaced, you start the replacement. So usually they operate for about 4 years. And that is actually quite a short period, because do you know what you did 4 years ago? Going to last Cephalocon, which was, felt like yesterday. But 4 years isn't that much. And the deprecation or end of life is something which a vendor usually tells you. And this is where the flexibility of Ceph comes in again, because it's open source. You actually determine when something is end of life. You decide if you want to keep running the hardware, yes or no. It's not a vendor telling you so. And if you don't get any BIOS updates anymore, is that really, really, really a major issue when running your Ceph system, which is designed for failure? I'm keeping certain security aspects out of here, because otherwise it gets a very complicated discussion. But focusing mainly on the reliability, Ceph can handle failing components. When you're looking at a company, you usually have a few things. You have OPEX, COGS, and CAPEX. So operating expenses, cost of goods sold, and CAPEX, capital expenditures, when you're actually buying equipment. So if you buy equipment, servers, switches, routers, that's CAPEX. And depending on the company, not the real financial talk here, either electricity can be an OPEX, operational expenses, or they could be a cost of goods sold, depending on how you organize the company, your financial structure. So, but these are usually terms you'll find in financial sheets, actually knowing where the money flows and where actually everything goes. But we'll be focusing on the electricity, so data center, cost of goods sold, and the CAPEX of actually buying machines. But there's something else we need to take into account.
Yeah, so I'm just going back to one slide for a second, just to pause here. But can I see who has been reading up on sustainability and the impact of hardware and stuff like that? So yeah, all know. Okay.
One hand over there.
Yeah.
I see a few hands. Yeah.
Sorry. So, what I noticed is, wow.
The label said vodka.
Yeah.
I think it won't have the problem if it was vodka. Sorry for that. So what I noticed is when we started this journey of becoming better at this, that's basically what it is. Becoming better at understanding what it means to be growing towards positive impact and to be more sustainable. A lot of new terms come at you. So I thought I picked some of those that stood out to me to explain a little bit. So one of those terms is the global warming potential. So the global warming potential, we talk a lot about CO2, but there's a lot of other gases around that will impact global warming. So what do you do? How do you measure that? Because every gas has a different property. So what they came up with was something called the global warming potential, which is a measurement or an expression of what impact would this gas have on the global warming given a period of time, because every gas apparently has different properties over a period of time. CO2 is stable over time, unfortunately, because that means that the impact will last forever. That is why it is the one. The impact of global warming potential of CO2 is 1. So everything gets measured against that. Then we go to the carbon dioxide equivalent. So if you know the impact of something over, I say 100 years, you can say how much carbon dioxide would I need to have the same impact as this other gas over that time period. So that's the carbon dioxide equivalent measured in kilograms. So I'm saying one is like speed and the other is like kilometers an hour. So it's kilograms of carbon dioxide equivalent. And then, of course, you have the carbon footprint of a product, which is the full life cycle of a product. What would the carbon equivalent footprint of that product be? So that's why you see sometimes, which was in the beginning was confusing to me, why do I see 20 years or 100 years in those documents? So given the 4 years that Wido talked about, that you are actually operating these servers if you have a cycle of 5 years, there's companies that are doing good research on this and providing you with some information about it. So one of those companies is Dell. And we took one of those reports and just really looked at it and thought about what would be the impact. And we picked one that is probably a bit similar to what the crowd here is running. Probably a bit, not fully the same system. So we're talking about a server that has 12 times 32 gigabytes. It has one 400 gigabyte SSD and 8 3.4 terabyte SSDs as well. These are important because to us, because we run storage, right? Empty servers do nothing for us. The rest is a normal server, but the CO2 equivalent of this server of 100 years would be 8,617 kilograms. Does that ring a bell? Or to me, it was just a number. It was just a number. So we'll dive into what that number means or what it's made up of a little bit further on, I think.
So now we're going to financials again. So we're going to be deprecating a machine in 5 years from financial perspective. So if you would say the capex spending is 10,000 euros to buy the machine, you're going to be, the deprecation is going to be 2,000 a year, and then you buy new servers. If you go to a 7-year lifetime, which is not unrealistic with modern machines, and because at your online, at a few of the companies we still have Ceph servers running from 6 to 7 years old, and they're still running on SATA SSDs, and we're still replacing those SSDs as they fail because the machines still function. And my philosophy is that end customers, they are not asking to run on NVMe or on SATA, depending, the industry you're on. They're asking for an end service to work reliably and fast. And they don't really care. Well, they might say they care, but in the end, they have a service which needs to be working. Because if you go to a website, do you really care if that website runs on an AMD EPYC from last year or on a CPU from 5 years ago? No, it just needs to work, right? Sometimes you need the new hardware to get to certain performance characteristics. But really looking at most applications out there, they don't need the newest hardware. So from a financial impact, going from 5 to 7 years, your deprecation is much better. So you get a financial impact, but you also get an environmental impact. So we try to do the environmental impact as well, because you might say, I'll buy a new server, and that new server is more energy efficient, saves 10% on energy. That should probably make a big difference, right? Let's go there. So we have an old server doing 200 watts, and we go down to 190 watts. That's 86 kilowatt hours of energy saved in a year at a PUE of 1.4 in a data center. Who doesn't know what the PUE value of a data center is? Okay, so that's the power unit effectiveness. I always forget the acronym. If your server is consuming 200 watts, the data center will be consuming another 40% for cooling, lighting, all kinds of stuff. So all the additional things around the IT load. So 200 watts of IT load, then you'll have nearly 300 watts actually being pulled from the grid just to run that server. Modern data centers, here in Amsterdam, there's now legislation. If you want to build a new data center, the PUE needs to be 1.2. Google, for example, claims they have 1.1, but that's only really achievable if you run your own data center, hardware really tailor-made for the data center. But you would say an average data center is somewhere between 1.3, 1.4, even 1.5 and 1.6 if you're in an older data center. They're still there. So it has a massive impact on energy usage. So you save 48 kilograms of CO2 in a year. Well, if you just looked at, almost 9 metric tons being consumed by that machine, it's not coming from electricity. It's coming from somewhere else. The data for this is that, it has a fairly small impact on your cost of goods sold, electricity usage, because it's almost neglectable, the 10 watts which you save on the machine. It might be that you say, I can go denser in my rack. So from, you say my density goes up, that might be a bit better, but usually it doesn't really make sense to replace just for energy consumption if you look from an environmental perspective. And the footprint only goes down a bit. We looked at the Dutch energy mix data from 2021 because the European Agency for Environment actually gets statistics and shows us how much CO2 is emitted for each kilowatt hour produced. And here we actually see the Netherlands is doing really bad, because the data from 2021 tells us that there's 480 grams of CO2 being emitted for every kilowatt hour being produced. That's because you have coal-fired plants, you have gas plants. We don't have much nuclear, and the renewables isn't on there yet. Data from 2021, so 2022 we still need to wait. This needs to be updated. But you can see that other countries like France, which has a lot of nuclear power, is actually doing much better. So if you would run the same calculation for, let's say, France, it might have a different impact. But actually the impact will be less because they already emit less CO2 per kilowatt hour. Who has ever thought about this, about how much their systems pollute when running? Yeah, that's why you're usually probably in this talk, right? To learn something more. Yeah. But anyway, this is quite interesting. So
it's a biased crowd.
Yeah, it's a biased crowd, but that's fine. Okay.
Yeah.
Wout.
Yeah, so we talked about the 8,000 kilograms, and it's made up of almost 9,000, but it's made up of some factors. So if we just extrapolate that a little bit creatively, as in, I'm sure if there's a statistician here, they might put some holes in it, but we thought, what is the difference in running your servers 4 years, 5 years, 6 years? And what you can see is that when you run your servers for 7 years, which is a long time, but it saves you a full cycle of usage. So you get your carbon for free for those 4 years, basically. So what does that look like in numbers? A little bit better explained, I guess. So if you run it for 4 years, then after 13 years, you reach 32 kilograms of CO2 equivalent for that server. If you run it for 7 years, you get there after 17 years. So that's a full 4-year replacement cycle that you have saved in carbon footprint or carbon dioxide equivalent pollution. So why is that? Why does it make such a difference? Well, the difference is in this. So if you look at the report from Dell, which we're very grateful for that they made it, it is about 50% of the, if you take a 4-year cycle, it's only 50% of that carbon is you running the server. The other 50% is when you sign the order to order it. That's when you got the 4,000 for free, basically. So if you run it for 4 years, then you only have influence on 50% of your footprint. That's the only influence that you have in usage. So being smarter about it, getting green energy instead of non-green energy, that's in the 50%. But if you go to a 5, 6, or 7-year cycle, that influence part rises to 64 or 46%, 64%. Sorry, it's the Dutch thing. So then, what is that 50% made of? And this is the statistic that really bothered me as a CEF guy. And
we actually looked at this a lot because we couldn't believe it.
Yeah, we got other servers, other reports, but the thing is, it's 80% of the 50% that you pay for when you buy it, 80% of that is those 8 SSDs that are in it. So if you look at full NVMe systems or SSD Ceph clusters, most of that carbon footprint is coming from the storage device. The question is why? Because we thought, or we kind of went out, but so a lot of times they consume less energy than the spinning drives when they're spinning 24/7. But the problem is what a chip is made out of, that is where the pollution is. And a hard disk platter is just basically some steel. So that's the problem. And we have no way of reducing this right now except run them for longer and make sure that you maximize the influential part of your carbon footprint.
Yeah, and earlier this morning during the opening, one of the questions at the developers was, how can you actually get more IOPS from a Ceph system? And let's talk about IOPS, about lowering the latency of an IO, actually getting more IOs in a single queue depth. And as I said, we're still running SATA systems with Ceph and also running NVMEs. And if you look at the performance characteristics, the SATA SSD systems are not that much slower than the NVMEs are, because the bottleneck with Ceph is usually the CPU. There is a difference, true, there is a difference. The NVMe systems and modern CPUs are faster, but if you look at what most applications require, and I cannot talk about all the use cases, but think about some backend systems running somewhere, some spam filters or whatever. It doesn't need that many IOs. You can still run a system on SATA-based SSDs, which are very commonly available. There's a lot of them out there. But buying refurbished machines is a no-go, right? You should never buy second-hand machines, because that's what they're telling you. Never buy a second-hand car, but everybody does it. My experience tells us that actually sometimes buying refurbished machines from a supplier which does proper testing on them before sending them to you, you actually get a better experience, because you get battle tested BIOSes, firmware, all the stuff. Have somebody else do it 2 years for you to get all the BIOS updates, and then you get a machine which just works. You save 50% on your CO2 equivalent impact by just buying a machine which was already produced, and you're just going to be using it a bit longer. You lower your capex, because it's usually 50%, but typically 30% lower capex when buying the machine. And if you would say, some machines, a Dell R740, which are NVMe machines, or a Supermicro long tight number, which you can buy, which will then also give you something. But they're much cheaper to buy refurbished than actually buying a new machine. And they were produced already, so buy what's already out there. And you can go to some SATA machines, the Dell R640 or R630 or Supermicro equivalent machines. They have machines out there which will just function just fine. And the same goes for networking, right? You need new networking, you need 100 gig, you need all the new networking fancy stuff. Looking again at Ceph is that, in my experience, 10 gig is sufficient for most use cases. And why? So in theory, an NVMe, 10 NVMEs can really fill up the 10G or 20G if you're looking at bonding. But, just throttle down the backfilling a bit so that you're going to be staying within the 20 gigs of the systems. But most Ceph systems actually do, and we're talking about OpenStack or CloudStack, RBD use cases, they are doing a lot of small IOPS. So it's a high amount of IO, but low bandwidth, a few hundred megabits per second, megabytes per second, or a few gigabits or gigabytes, how you want to call it, per second going through the system. But you're not filling up all the links all the time. Only during backfill, that's when you'll see this. Looking at latency, if you go from 1 gig to 10 gig, it's a major difference in latency. But I assume nobody's running Ceph anymore on 1 gig. Might be some Raspberry Pis for some testing. Oh, they are there? Yeah, sorry, I've been out of that part for a while now. But if you look on a latency perspective, a 40 gig link is actually 4 times 10 gig internally. So latency of 10 and 40 gigs is exactly the same. So no real need to go towards 40 gig for lower latency. 25 gig is running on a different clock speed, which has a slightly lower latency. 100 gig is internally just 4 times 25. But the latency saving you get from going to a higher bandwidth is neglectable because the major latency is still in the OSD, in the clock speed of the CPU. The questions this morning was, getting lower latency, getting the CPUs to run at their highest clock ratio and actually pinning them to C state 1. That gives you the lowest latency. You can see about 0.7 milliseconds of a write latency of 4K.
Which is not great for your footprint.
Which is not great for your footprint. No, true. But if you buy refurbished, yeah.
That's the thing.
That's the thing. You need to think about indeed what you can do. But what I'm saying is you don't need new networking. You can usually buy refurbished hardware, networking equipment which was already produced, and you just reuse it again and work it. And 10 gig, it's so easy to get. It's out there everywhere. Widely available, some Juniper machine switches or Arista switches, which work just fine for Ceph. And again, at Your Online, we have a lot of Ceph. The majority still runs on 10 gig, doing a lot of IOs, hundreds of thousands of IOs per second through those Ceph clusters. But it's just, it's a large system. You distribute it out over multiple machines. So if you look at one machine, it's doing a few hundred megabytes per second. That's what it typically is doing. But then we have legislation coming up. The EU, the Green Deal. Everybody heard of it, I guess, or at least the Europeans here. I think you heard the Green Deal somewhere. We have the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive coming up in 2024. Certain companies need to comply with the reporting in 2024, others in 2025. But you will need to start reporting about your sustainability as a company. And it starts small, but this will be growing bigger and bigger over the coming years. You need to start reporting on environment, social, and governance. And I'm going to be going towards the environment part because the S and the G are not relevant for this talk. But there are European standards, which are in draft now, but they'll become final this year, which tells you how you actually need to measure the impact of your company. And over the coming years, it's going to be phased on which things we need to report on. There are certain KPIs, then you need to start setting targets for your company. And then your accountant will need to check them when signing off on your yearly report. So they'll be checking you as well on these kinds of things. You see the large accountancy firms now working on this, how to implement this within the thing. And then you're thinking, does this really matter for me as a Ceph engineer? Why am I listening to a European legislation? Well, it goes further than this. Because it will need to go into yearly report, and you'll need to start reporting about your cycle. So a few things, this is one of the things from the draft. Your CO2 emissions in a few scopes and, your data center and cloud computing services, how much CO2 it emits, you need to start reporting on that. And your Ceph system is a part of this. This is on emissions which you're emitting indirectly or directly. So this could either be you consuming electricity or your data center consuming electricity or your cloud provider. But if you run Ceph, you don't have a cloud provider. But you get the point. You need to figure this out. You need to start asking your supplier how much CO2 they are emitting from their environment. At Your Online, I am responsible for the ESG as well. Some might say, why is the CTO being busy with this kinds of stuff? Well, we see our biggest impact is on environment. Social and governance, of course. Social, it's diversity of workforce, payment gaps, etc. Governance is about how the board is structured. Again, I'll not go into that part, but our impact is mainly our data center, IT equipment, our e-waste is what we have as an online company. Energy usage, which are resulting in CO2 emissions, and then the total life cycle of the equipment and the carbon footprint of this. So a bit of environment on our part, 15 data centers, more than 5,000 physical servers, and we're consuming more than 10 megawatt hours of electricity per year. I did a calculation of the CO2. That's a few metric tons of CO2 just from electricity consumption. But we have Ceph running on systems older than 5 years. But now things are getting more interesting. Scope 1 is just, your indirect emissions from purchased electricity. But as you go further and the legislation in the EU will become more strict, you need to go towards Scope 3. Outsourced activities, processed products, which are the service which you're buying. And at some point, you will actually need to report on the full chain how much CO2 you're emitting from things you purchased. So Dell was already doing a great thing where they're telling you what the carbon footprint of a particular machine is. But in the coming years, you will need to start reporting on this. Depending on the company size, it might be 2024, 25, 26, but it will be mandatory for every company operating European Union by 2028. And after that, you'll get more and more directives actually going through the full chain, actually purchasing your goods up until running them and then what the total life cycle is. And this is probably going to end up at you engineers because you know what the stuff you're buying and you also have an impact. You make a decision or you ask somebody to buy equipment, and that has a direct impact on emissions. And that's where the European Union wants you to think about with the Green Deal, is the impact you have with buying IT equipment. And this is where we get with a few questions, because we had some time left and we figured this might be open for a bit of debate.
Yes.
And Wout.
So I just want to tell you guys, for us, this is a total journey kind of thing. You know, we are somewhere, we need to go somewhere that's better. And for us, it ends usually in trying to answer a question, and then at the end we have either 2, 4, or 6 questions and no answers. So I don't know about how you feel about that, but I'm really curious to see if we can have some interaction here and see how people are doing and dealing with this stuff, and if you are aware of most of the parts.
So we have this is just to get the discussion started, and we'll show the email address again. So I see one hand. I'll bring you the mic.
Sorry, Pietro Hyvärinen from CSC Finland. I'm always online, or at least on these things, making questions like, well, we are running a lot of hardware, and some of the nodes are already 7 years plus over. They are not on active production, but they are still on a data center for testing environment and things like that. I was wondering the fire hazard. Have you think about that? Because we've seen during the pandemics some outage of a big data centers about the fire hazard, and I don't know the root cause of every of them, but maybe wearing out machines can pose risk for fire problems.
Yeah, it's a good point. We didn't get into that in this talk, so we try to keep it a little bit focused because it's a rabbit hole going into it, and it's a really deep one. So we had to take some assumptions there, but it's a very good point and a very good consideration. We have to incorporate that. We have to. But I don't have an answer there. Thanks for another question. That's good.
Did anyone else already look into that?
Yeah.
Oh no.
We're from the Dutch government. This is mandatory for us to look at. I think your numbers could even be better. For example, if you do the 7 years things instead of 5, and so the production, for example, worldwide production would be 100,000 servers a year, and if you use them longer, 10% longer, you need a yearly production that goes down. Yeah. So the impact amplifies to the beginning of the chain. We're also looking at after the 7 years, so we could donate them to schools or other non-profit organizations. This is not allowed. It was a lobby from the vendors, but we're fighting against it and trying to get it implemented so that we, from the government, if after 7 years or longer we dismiss a server, it still has a useful life for non-profits, so it can be even more extended because then they need no new servers. so you can double your purchase limitation. And furthermore, we're looking into water cooling. I first dismissed it. I even canceled the meeting. But somehow I ended up on the table. And I thought it was about the excessive heat we produced, but it was not. The water cooling was targeted to reduce power usage by 30 to 60%. And we can get, if you have water cooling, you can heat the city with it. So we can even go below the 1 PUE. So
that's getting a positive impact then.
yeah, oh, definitely. And so the city has a requirement that if we do that and we provide the water, the intake would be 25 degrees. But if we pump it slower through our servers, and we can get it up to 60 degrees, and it would have great impact on heating the city. So I totally agree with your presentation, but it can be way, way, way bigger and more impact than you already stated.
Yeah, so that's
There was also
this
one
is.
question next to.
So I want to respond a little bit to that because these are all very great things, but they are in the top 50%, and that's part of the problem that we discovered is whatever you do to do better is usually in the top 50%, which is great. Do not stop doing that. Maximize that. But that's if you do 100% of the 50%, your impact is still that 50%, and prolonging it and then giving it to other things is great. That extends the lifetime of that product, which reduces the impact per year that it's having. So that's great. By the way, does anybody know what the server, if you would not send it to be used by somebody else, but if you recover, what do you call it? Recycle it. If you recycle it, what would that bring you? Does anybody have an idea? Given the 8,000 kilograms, what would you get back? So from the report, it says 200 kilograms. So that's better than nothing, and it's good to do that. So do that. If you have to scrap them, recycle them, please. But the impact is really that bottom half where you have no influence after buying it.
So we have 2 minutes.
So you have to diversify. So you do have to
Exactly.
and not only one,
yes,
but all 10 of them.
yes.
In your example, server used SSDs only, but mostly for Ceph we have a ton of rotational disks.
Yes.
So how much are they visible in this formula?
In this particular example,
Because you said
not at
SSDs
all.
are 80%
Yes.
of the cost, but our
So
servers are mostly.
they are compared to SSDs. I don't want to use the word negligible, but
Okay.
I did.
Right.
No, it's not negligible, but it's like it completely blew my mind how much more the SSDs were. And there are some reports. So if you just contact me, I can give you a report which has examples of HDDs. But it's only the problem that I saw was a lot of these reports are like, yeah, let's do this report and let's take a server. It has one CPU, one stick of memory.
Yeah.
It's like, how many of you use those servers? So, it's, and I really like what Dell did there. They did a report and they said, yeah, just pack the server with a usable, 2 CPUs, a lot of memory. This is how they are in the data center now. But HDDs is much better, yeah, because it's steel and plastic. Most of the part of steel or plastic. And with SSDs, these are small PCBs with just chips on it.
So my main question, 5 years of age of servers. So usually vendors, they sell you, warranty for 3 years and you should renew your hardware every 3 years. That's how our IT department is running. Like they always frown at any server that is past the warranty phase. And I always say, I'm running my Ceph servers until they are 5 years of age.
Yeah.
That's my goal. And I take it that they are out of warranty and they say, that's too long. So now you're talking about 5 as a base and then going to 7, right? Vendors don't like that. So
This is one of the remarks, and then we'll go to the final question. Is that one of the remarks which we have is, of course, this is goes into against the commercial interests of vendors. So that's why everybody's been telling you that 3 years, 5 years, you could pick a number, but it goes against the commercial interests of companies having it running longer. So you'll find reports out there that people say it should not be done. I'm not saying this is this is a theory or something, but it's commercially they want to sell as much as possible, but this shows that we should buy as less as possible. And that goes into the whole way the world works, because the world is about consuming more, about selling more, but we want to grow infinite on a planet with finite resources. That's a problem which we have. And we have commercial interests not being aligned. And so my final question, then we'll go to your final remark for all the developers here who develop on Ceph or some project. Keep in mind that hardware from 5 years or 6 or 7 years old is still relevant. When developing stuff, don't always be developing for the bleeding edge. Make sure that all the equipment is properly supported, because there, with your keyboard, with writing some code, you can make a major impact without you knowing it. And that was a final remark.
So it was a kind of a reply to what you said. Do you need a warranty? It's Ceph.
Yeah, exactly.
The hardware fails, just take it out. It rebuilds.
That is true. That is true.
All the same year and the same month.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we hope this got you started thinking about it. Have these discussions when procuring new hardware. Think about this. Do not only think about the financial impact, about other impacts as well. Take this message home to your companies, to the offices. Make sure this is a topic, a discussion happening when somebody's talking about replacing equipment. Think twice before replacing something.
So, thanks.